Hello everyone, James here. A quick note before we start this week's episode of Humanism Now, we would like to hear from you. As we approach our 100th episode, I'm going to be hosting an Ask Me Anything. So please send in your questions for me, or perhaps there's something you wanted to ask one of our recent guests. You can contact us on any of our social media, or the best route would be to email us on the email address in the show notes. I'd also love to hear your feedback. After 3 years of running and hosting Humanism Now, I want to know what's working, what you think we could be doing better, and if you're not supporting the show, what would make that worthwhile for you. A huge thank you to our continued supporters over at Ko-Fi. If you'd like to join them, links to that are in the show notes. Please do send in your questions, your feedback, and any comments you have. Hearing directly from our listeners is what makes all of this worthwhile. Thanks again, and enjoy this week's episode of Humanism Now. Welcome to Humanism Now, a podcast about secular ethics, curiosity, and compassion. I'm your host, James Hodgson. Our guest today should need no introduction to our listeners. Seth Andrews is one of the OGs of humanist and atheist podcasting. As the host of the Thinking Atheist Podcast, one of the most popular podcasts and online atheist communities in the world. A former evangelical and Christian broadcaster, Seth is now one of the leading voices in the atheist movement globally. He's authored 6 books, including his latest offering, Christianity Made Me Talk Like an Idiot, and he hosts a second podcast called True Stories with Seth Andrews. A renowned conference speaker, always with humour and heart, Seth is a global advocate for science and skepticism, the importance of humanism, and why we should all pursue a personal relationship with reality. Seth Andrews, welcome to Humanism Now.
With an intro like that, I sound like I should run for office. Although I know in Oklahoma and in the United States, being an atheist, I'm probably the least qualified, like the least electable. Maybe I'm more qualified, least electable. But no, thanks for the kind words and thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Maybe the campaign starts here.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, maybe we'll start. This is ground zero right here. So
I'm sure most of our listeners will be aware of the Thinking Atheist and have heard you speak previously. But I don't think I've ever heard the full journey or your full personal story to how you arrived at whether you'd like to call yourself humanist or you prefer the term atheist, having previously been a Christian broadcaster. So where did this all begin for you?
It's funny. I used to lead with atheist when I first came out of the faith, first several years. Now I lead with humanist, right? Because atheism is what I don't believe, God I don't believe in, or gods I don't believe in, but that's not a statement of values, really. Humanism is my statement of values, and I've really been pounding that drum a lot more on the show. The short version of the long story is that I was born into a devoutly Christian home. My mother and father were hardcore believers, theologian-level believers. They wrote sermons for pastors. There was no light reading in our home. They had an entire bookshelf of concordances and breakdowns, theologies, religious histories. And my mother wrote a Greek New Testament study guide that was used at the college level. I mean, this was the type of Christianity we had. So it was Bible, literalism, Adam and Eve, and Noah's Ark and Moses, and all those things. Jesus died on a cross, heaven and hell are real. And so that was my normal, and we loved it. Yay, good for us. We happened to be born into the right faith at the right time, in the right place, to the right parents and the right religion. And so I was just immersed, literally baptized into Christian schools, Christian churches, Christian music, Christian culture. I was a student leader. I was kind of this front-facing dude with the ability to communicate when I was in high school, so I ended up on stage a lot, right? Some teenager who's expounding and giving his great wisdom about the world. Wasn't old enough to drive. I wasn't old enough to vote. I hadn't been into the world, but somehow I was useful for church leaders. Look, a bright and shining example of the new generation that will take back this country for Christ. And because I was immersed in Christian music and a big fan, it was an easy segue into Christian radio. And I became a Christian radio host in 1990, and I spent 14 years in FM radio, most of it Christian radio. Amy Grant, Stephen Curtis Chapman, Michael W. Smith, Whiteheart, Stryper, those types of bands. And then I segued into video production for a decade, and most of our clients were churches. I was eyeball deep in it. But it was funny because late in the 90s, I started to hear that alarm bell of doubt in the back of my skull. And for a long time under the surface, I was really struggling to make sense of the senselessness And it was in my late 30s that I started to finally give myself permission to not take for an answer, just take it on faith, but to try to find out what's going on. And that's why I named the site in the podcast, The Thinking Atheist, which is not me, certainly, but it's an idea because faith is a terrible way to find out what's true. You take it on, Christopher Hitchens used to say, it's called faith because it's not knowledge. And so I'm like, there are a lot of gaps we'll never fill in our knowledge, but I don't want to just believe. When possible, I want to know. And so the Thinking Atheist was an encouragement to myself and to everybody else. Let's think on these things. Let's reason it out. Let's try to figure it out as best we can. And so the site and the shows have been going on for about 17 years, and somehow I'm still here. So anyway, that's my story in a nutshell.
So was it quite an immediate jump then from being immersed in the world of not Christian radio anymore, but still working primarily with churches to, I guess, had you fully deconstructed when you launched the Thinking Atheist, or were you still working through these questions?
I'm slow. I mean, it took me forever. It was in the late 90s, I remember, that I was starting to think, well, this doesn't make sense. But you are trained in the faith that doubt is a sin, right? Who's the one disciple that our parents never told us to be like? They were like, be like John, be like Paul, be like Peter. They never said be like Thomas, doubting Thomas, right? Bible says the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. And so doubt was either an attack of the evil one, or it was rebellion, or it was just weakness in your faith. And so whenever I would hear those doubts, I used to just blink them away. Oh, there's something wrong. I should never doubt. That's disobedience. That's weakness. It's an attack. And I don't know if it was midlife, or maybe it was just all those years of being dissatisfied. I just came to a point in my 30s where I thought, all right, well, I'm going to figure this out. But it took me a long time. I mean, my deconstruction, I think I started my deep dive. I thought, I'm going to go back to square one. I'm going to figure this out. I was 37, but I didn't say the word atheist in regard to myself till I was 38. And so it was a year of reading the Bible and getting into Bible history and speaking to the experts, the apologists. And of course, the more they answered my questions, the more questions I had. It took me a long time too to find the courage, and it's a mess. It was a big noise in my own head. And I had to let that noise settle just a little bit. And then after that, I was like, I want to be part of these conversations. I've got to get the word out. I was so naive. When other believers hear what I have discovered about the Christian faith, they will all lock arms with me, and we will walk away from superstition, and we will prance off to Reasonville together, and it will be a beautiful thing. And of course, that's not remotely what happened. Nobody cared. Nobody wanted to hear. Everybody was patting me on the head like I was some broken thing. And I actually probably started my activism long before I should have. I should have taken a few years and settled down because I was hot. I was keyed up. I still had so much to learn. I always do. But back then, I jumped into the race a bit too soon. But even then, it took me a few years after that to get over the fear of hell. Even though in my brain, I'm an atheist. I know Christianity is not true. But that baked in fear of what if I'm wrong, I'll burn forever. Oh my God, what's going to happen? That stuff runs deep. So it took me a long time. It was not, some people get out with a snap of the finger. And for me, it was a slow burn. It took a long time for that fuse to reach the end.
And so then you would have started the Thinking Atheist.
2009, I think, for the website.
So then you launched Thinking Atheist really before the boom in podcasting. And to publicly advocate, as you say, but also think through these questions.
Yeah, what's funny is that I was still working for a company owned by Christians, which served churches mostly. It was a video and 3D animation company. We also served universities and some city planners and some other things. Or probably 80% of the videos we did were fundraising videos for churches. So I was terrified that if I am found out, I will lose my job. They'll find a reason to fire me. I won't be able to afford my mortgage payment. I'll lose everything. Financially, I will be destitute at midlife. What else would I do? And so for the first 2 years of The Thinking Atheist, it was an audio podcast and videos that did not feature my face. No one knew who I was. It was just my first name. And it wasn't until the summer of 2011 that I finally just decided, screw it, and stood on stage at a convention and sort of introduced myself to the world. The cat's out of the bag. Whatever happens, happens. But it took me a while even just to be able to be real enough to say, hi, I'm Seth, and reveal my first and last name and face. I think that speaks to how hard of a journey it is for a lot of people. There are some who dismiss and say, come on, get over it. It's Santa Claus for adults, you coward, or what's the matter? And they don't understand the many gears in the machine of deconstruction. And sometimes those gears turn slowly, and I think we need to be empathetic and understanding about that.
And I think anybody who goes through that process, there's a huge amount of bravery involved to step away, particularly when you're so immersed, in it's every part of your life, but even more so to do it in such a public manner.
Oh, I say that to people I meet on the road. They will come up to me and they're like, I heard this show and it encouraged me and you inspire me or something like that. And I'm like, holy cow. I'm like, do you have any idea how much courage it took for you to be honest with yourself and others about your journey and to speak in your authentic voice, whatever the consequences were, and to come to this point in your life when so many other people will never get there? I say, you inspire me. And I'm not trying to be fake or saccharine. I'm like, yours is a remarkable story. And that's the encouragement I give other people, because it does take a lot of courage. And a lot of times people pay a terrible price for the crime of being an authentic person.
Were there any advantages you found from going through this process publicly? Was it helpful for having a way to explain your views to people who may have questions that it could help them understand, or did it help you work through any issues?
One thing about being an evangelical is I have a kind of equity in conversations about Christianity. So if someone comes up to me with one of the standard protests, no one who ever knew the love of Jesus would have ever walked away, or you don't know what true Christianity is, or that's not what the Bible says. After an entire lifetime, or at least 30-some years in the faith, I was absolutely sincere. And I did believe it when I said the salvation prayer. And I did understand what the culture is like. Everything I did was Christian. Everything we said was Christian. And then part of my deconstruction was an even deeper dive into a Bible I thought I knew at the time. But going back, of course, was that verse in there? Holy cow, I never read this scripture this way before. Oh, what's this about? And it's interesting because I knew more about the Bible than many of its defenders. So having those decades inside the faith I lament the wasted years. And I beat myself up sometimes for being too thick to figure out that maybe an Old Testament donkey did not speak in Hebrew, right? I mean, this is basic. But the upside is that I can speak with authority about what happens behind church walls and what is within the covers of the Christian Bible. And that has helped me in my efforts to help others deconstruct and to sound my protests about a superstition which does provide some good things, but has way too much baggage for me to support.
And I guess the arguments that they will put forward. I always wonder, looking back at the time, what would you have said was the strongest argument that you knew of for the truth of Christianity?
For me, it was more of a defensive posture. Here's what Christians are often, even if we're not realize we're trained to do it, the science and nature and the evidence proves God. And then someone brings evidence that doesn't add up, and we say, it's not about evidence. God exists beyond the natural. This is a matter of faith. I have a personal relationship with Jesus. And so I always had a fallback position. I wasn't engaging non-believers a lot when I was in the faith because I was just surrounded by Christians. I was in a reinforcement culture. We just knew we were right. We didn't have to ask any more questions because we already had the answer with a capital A. It's one of those things like we were taught to make fun of Charles Darwin. None of us had ever cracked open on the origin of species or taken a legitimate evolutionary biology class. So we knew he was wrong, but we didn't know what he was talking about. And that's kind of the faith. But a lot of it really came down to he lives in my heart. And I just know it in my heart. And that's this weird spot where, because people can't read minds, because clairvoyancy isn't real, then we felt safe. But beyond that, it was the typical stuff. How could you look at the birth of a beautiful baby? How could you see the design, how complex the world is? We saw complexity and we saw great engineering. And of course, engineers will tell you that the most amazing pieces of engineering are the ones that are distilled down to simplicity with the least amount of waste. But we just saw complicated stuff and we thought, wow, it's beyond me, Jesus, kind of thing. But, probably the personal relationship argument was the one I used the most.
Yeah, and I guess that's the hardest one to challenge from the outside as well.
How do you know what I'm thinking? How do you know if there wasn't a magical moment inside my body and my mind? Well, how do you prove I don't have a soul? It's one of those things where, because they can't crawl into my skull, I'm supposedly able to, quote unquote, win the argument. It's pretty convenient. So,
and now that you're a active leader, advocate within the atheist humanist movement globally, how do we avoid some of those same mistakes of falling into groupthink and the arrogance of going, we know that we're right?
And there's a lot of that. It's funny, I'm preparing a speech. I don't know if I'm going to give it this year, but I may do the speech. I may do it this fall. And many of the non-religious in my circles are going to get it, and they're going to go with it, and they're going to support it, and there are going to be others who lose their minds. And it's about how we who are not religious are not immune from being emotional bags of animated meat, right? We're all primates. We look for things that reinforce what we already think and who we already are. And we can be very knee-jerky. And I found atheism is not an inoculation against irrationality or awfulness. I've met flat earth atheists. I've met anti-vaccine atheists. I've met just nasty, mean, toxic human beings who happen to not believe in a God. So I don't believe in God doesn't guarantee anything else about you. I would like to think that removing the God baggage might prime you a little more, possibly to edge into a natural world existence, a science-based existence. But, we make a lot of mistakes. I'm often online when I see my fellow atheists, humanists, progressives, and they'll post some sort of meme about the religious that is totally untrue and unfair. Religion is a mental illness. No, it's not. I wasn't mentally ill when I was a devout believer in Jesus Christ. It's a horrible argument. And why in the world would you ever say it? There was one that I saw where, why are Sundays so peaceful? It's because the evil people are at church. Somebody actually posted that one. Politically, a lot of people like to post stuff, and I'm a huge critic of President Donald Trump. I just despise the man and what he represents, but people will post things about him, quotes, that he never actually said. And I have to come forward and say, he never said this quote. And they get mad at me because, well, it sounds like something he would have said. And why in the world would you take a moment to talk about what's wrong with us when so much more is wrong with him? And I'm like, this is an example of how we often become less interested in being right than sounding right or being proven right or being validated. And, we're all flawed, fallible human beings. And so, it's the difference, I think, between atheism and rationalism. And I get it wrong. I've shared stuff that I found out was wrong and had to go retract it. I've had horrible ideas, and I'm like, oh, what was I thinking? But once we acknowledge that we are not immune because we use the A word in regard to ourselves, it does open us up to live a more honest, a more difficult, certainly, but a more honest life when it comes to trying to figure out what is true. Robert Greene Ingersoll famously said, the more false we destroy, the more room there will be for the true. And I've taken that coda up in my own life. It's a goal. Let's destroy the false so we can make room for the true. And if that includes something that we have believed, something that was said or a bad statement about religious people or whatever, we need to destroy that so we can make more room for the true.
And it's a good quote because it doesn't say that whatever's left is true.
Yeah.
You still have to do the work.
And some of that just comes from such a superior, smug, reductive attitude. Most of the people in my life are religious. And they're not evil. They're not wicked. They're not Nazis. And I think, what are you trying to accomplish? This is just tribalism, which is what we say they're guilty of. This is us being the superior tribe. We are the lofty, meritorious in-group, and they are the troglodyte out-group, and therefore we diminish and dehumanize constantly. That's not the world I want to live in. That's not how we're going to change the world. And I'll tell you, our tribe can have some really bad ideas. Any group, any organization, any gathering of people who have like-minded ideas or like interests or whatever, a family of any kind, they can be guilty of. Tribalism, having a tribe can be a wonderful thing, but we know that tribalism has a dark side to it. And atheist humanists are far from immune. And we have to be honest with ourselves about that, I think, to be able to pursue truth in a healthy way.
Have you seen tribalism in all areas get worse with the rise of political polarization? I'm thinking particularly in the US, and I know you're focusing on more political content now.
Yeah.
Do you think that the two are related, or was there always a strand of that within this, the religion versus the atheist context?
Human beings have always potted themselves, P-O-D-D, not potted like a plant, but they've always gotten into pods. I don't even know if potted's a word. I just made it up. Thank you, world. But the internet has really facilitated disinformation and information and disinformation and tribal silos, where the algorithm can push you into an extremely narrow way of thinking. That's new. So starting in the 90s, we really began to see that we could immediately lock in with somebody who was hyper-focused on how we think and validating how we think, echoing how we think, and vice versa. So we feed on and feed into this group, and we are then connected with each other. And even though we are digitally connected to the rest of the world, there is a disconnect intellectually and emotionally from what others are thinking and feeling. And so now we have, instead of this amount of tribes, we have a squillion micro tribes, sometimes within those tribes, like groups and subgroups. And I don't even know how you deal with that, except we have to purposefully, as a force of will, step out of our tribe, beyond our walls, and begin to, whenever possible, and it's certainly not always, to understand where are others getting their information? What's feeding them? What's their background? What's their temperaments? Were they primed in some way? Are they members of a cult? And how do cults operate? What's the model, or what are the models for cults? Am I guilty of tribal thinking in a destructive way? And this requires time and energy and pain and nuance. And you know what the internet does not do well is all of that, right? We want it simple. We want it on a sticker or a meme or a line. We want to win. We're not interested in engagement as much as just smashing the other. I can put any comment online. I can go and make any polarizing opinion online. Boom. And there is very little in terms of nuanced approach to other people. I have to go into my own threads and say to members of our community in the atheist movement or whatever, let's stop with the name calling. This is an unfair response. They came in with an opinion you disagree with. Let's explore that as adults in good faith. Throwing feces at each other to try to win, and then gathering our tribe to gang up as their tribe gangs up. And before you know it, you're mashing into the internet forums for weeks. Nobody changes their mind. Everybody leaves exasperated. We're further divided. I'm not saying it's always possible to connect with people. Sometimes we have to draw the hard line. Sometimes we have to cut a cord. Sometimes we do have to go nuclear. I get that. But too often we unnecessarily cheat ourselves of the humanity that many of these conversations deserve. And again, it's not always popular. I get a lot of pushback, but I feel like I have to lead by example as best I can. But I'm guilty. We've all knee-jerked. We've all heard and said something. We're like, oh, I'm done. I'm just done. And then you go into nuke mode and nuke them from orbit. But the tribalism is I think it's only going to get worse. The only way to get past it is to be aware of it. And that's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, it seems to come back to this idea that if you want to be considered rational, you want to be considered reasonable, it is constant work. It's not a case of saying, I'm a rational person now, I'm reasonable, therefore I've got the right views, I'm associating with the right people. As you say, it's that constant questioning.
It is. And it was in my own life that I was pretty snarky about the religious. I think I was mostly just angry with myself. For the first 3 or 4 years of my activism, I was really sarcastic. My content was really snarky about the sheeple. And then once my temper subsided and I got my head together and I realized how unhelpful I was being, I thought, no, I wasn't a bad person when I was a believer for so many decades. I didn't deserve the insults when I was a believer. I was simply a victim of bad ideas. I was perpetrating bad ideas, but I was also a victim of bad ideas. And this is also something the internet does not do well, and we emotional primates do not do well. And the truth is that more than one thing can be true at the same time. People like cut and dry, A, B, left, right, black, white, good, evil, absolutes. And that's just not the world. Are there things that are absolutely this or that out there? Yeah, I'll concede that. But often many things can be true at the same time. And that requires, again, us putting in the work to get through this ocean of nuance to be fair. And that's something that, especially when we are bombarded with the avalanche of information, disinformation, inflammatory headlines, online baits, you name it. We're punch drunk all the time. We are certainly not in the mode of, well, I think I'll take a few days and with consideration research this one thing. We're scrolling past 500 things that have doom scrolled through our lives in the course of an afternoon,
And do you see a need, going back to the point about politics and polarization, do you see that there is a pressing need to have more political content in the current times with your podcasts? Or do you still feel that the main space needs to be in the atheist humanist advocacy area?
Things have changed. I think there's an overlap between humanism and our political conversations, and there's some overlap with atheism. But I'm an activist against the overreach of this administration in the United States. I'm an activist condemning the grift and the corruption and the predation of Donald Trump, the weaponization of our government against our own citizens, the cruelty and the suffering that's being carried out with glee and supported by tens of millions of my fellow countrymen and women. I'm against that, which is political, but I'm against it because I'm a humanist. Because I want to decrease suffering and increase flourishing, and I resist all this holy war God speak that many are using to justify the worst of behaviors. This country is infected with this idea that we are one nation under God and God wills it, and there's a riff on divine command theory or vertical morality, which is how many people in the MAGA cult excuse the horrible things that Donald Trump does. You challenge them and you say, well, he doesn't represent any of the best teachings of Jesus. Turn the other cheek, a soft answer turns away wrath, don't love money, don't lust, don't commit adultery, don't take revenge. And they're like, God has appointed him. And if he breaks some rules, and if he bends the laws, and he has to smash the system in order to rebuild it, as long as God appointed him, that's all that matters to me. And that allows them to excuse the literal shredding of our Constitution because God's champion is here and will rebuild God's kingdom upon the ashes. Resisting that is a humanistic thing to do. We say the supernatural needs to be taken. Our foreign policy initiatives, our attitudes about the Israeli genocide in Gaza, which has just been confirmed by the UN investigators. These are religious. They are excused biblically. In this country, Israel at all cost, Netanyahu supported at all cost, no matter who's murdered, etc. I resist the religion in a political environment because I'm a humanist. Again, more than one thing can be true at the same time. And as a result, on my own channel, we've gone from, we still do a lot of dissecting of the religions, Christianity, Islam, we get into the cults, we talk about the psychology of belief. So we do a lot of religion. Most of what we've done recently is about politics, the culture, humanity, and humanism. And that's because the country's on fire, and you can only debunk the book of Genesis so many times. You can only debunk Adam and Eve and Noah's flood so many times. So my work lately has really been more about humanism, and that speaks to the political nightmare that we are living in. And by the way, for the record, I'd like to apologize to the rest of the world for the rogues and the anti-democratic agents of cruelty and the fact that we, once a leader in the world, are now a runaway clown car. I'd just like to apologize for tens of millions of us who've been dragged into this nightmare by a very well-funded and very well-organized minority.
Very well put. And it's interesting as well that, there's clearly religious elements and fundamentalist believers who are within that movement. This, as you say, a movement which is founded on, as you say, dehumanization, really, cruelty, anti-empathy, anti-democracy, anti-curiosity as well. It's wanting to limit people's access to information and education. But there are also people who I'm fairly certain would be atheists who are within that movement as well. And likewise, I think we have allies on our side who are people of faith as well. I'm certainly, as you can imagine from the focus of this show, someone who agrees that the antithesis of what we're seeing is humanism. Humanism is this fantastic broad term which covers all of those areas which we want to promote in society. But I'm wondering, do you see that humanism is well understood in the US at the moment, or is it still seen as slightly threatening, atheistic, purely atheistic, rather than, as you say, advocating for some of these positive attributes?
I do find myself having to explain humanism. I remember I was a kid. We were watching classic Star Trek, Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek, which originally aired in the late 60s, and I was watching the reruns of it in the 70s and the 80s. And I remember Roddenberry was an atheist, and there were a lot of humanistic themes in Trek, and I think that's true even today. But my mother was watching, and I don't know, it was Kirk or someone went off on some tirade about how humanity, and she said, "Oh, that's humanism." And the way it came out of her mouth set a tone. It was kind of baked into me that, oh, humanism, bad, humanism. And it was framed as it's human-centric, it's human-focused, not God-focused. So it's selfishness. It is the arrogance of thinking that it's all about us, or that we would even have the power to do what God would be doing, like good and evil and morality, and all these things should be guided from the divine, not from the carnal and the mortal. But I didn't really understand what humanism was. I didn't see the beauty in it. I didn't see the importance of it. And I do find myself having to explain, well, what's a humanist? Is it just another religion? Some people have been, the religious right in this country, their campaigns are defined by scare words. Socialism's one of the big ones. Trans is another big one. Communism right now, that's another huge one in the news this week. But they bake it all, they literally marry it all together. So it's all humanism, socialism, LGBT, the sodomites, the humanists. They just throw everybody who is different and scary and coming for you. And they're coming for your church and your faith and your religion and your Bible and your God and your children and your future and your country. They're all coming for you. Humanists get locked into that narrative. And it's funny because these people are often like I was. They knew they resisted it, but they couldn't tell you what it was. And so I do enjoy having that. It's an easier conversation than the atheist one, because you say the word atheist and people will sometimes blink and blanch and sit up. Oh, atheist, right? But if I say a humanist, I don't get that response as much, but they're like, what is that? And I'm able to talk about good for goodness sake, solving our problems in the here and now, leading with empathy, building the world we want to live in. And values-wise, that is often something they relate to. They framed it differently. But they don't want to hurt people. The people I'm talking to, they want to help people. They want to live in a more peaceful and less warlike world. They don't want to see unwanted suffering. That's a point of agreement. And it's on those tiny foundations that I think larger conversations can begin. Also, if they know I'm non-religious, but I'm interested very much in the good, it shatters their categories, because they've been trained to think that the godless are these rudderless, sad, immoral, purposeless beings. And here they see Seth, and he's pretty centered, and he's got lots of love in his life, and he laughs and has a great time, and his life is good. So how do I reconcile that? And secretly, I know there must be having conversations. I'm messing up their categories and hopefully expanding how they see people who don't believe what they believe.
I was going to ask you for your elevator pitch for humanism, but I think you gave it there. So I
had a guy call my show a couple weeks ago, and he's like, well, how would you know right from wrong? How do you even know what harm is without God? And I look at it and I'm like, it's not hard. I understand what harm is because I've had harm done to me. I get it. It's not arbitrary. I think the example I use with him is that, look, I could send you to the spa. And I could gift you, here's a 2-hour massage, and you're going to get pampering, and they're going to bring you wine, and they're going to treat you like a king, and you're going to go and decompress and have the ultimate pampering. Or I could hit you in the face with a bat. Which one of those could be qualified as flourishing, and which one would be harm and suffering? This is not a difficult concept to understand, because we can understand that helping to build a society where we are reducing suffering and increasing flourishing, it helps others, which helps the tribe, which helps the species, which may come back upon us. Even if there's no such thing as true altruism, okay, fine, we can have that. Even if it's partially selfish, it's still beneficial to everybody to act in a pro-social way. And so where I once didn't understand humanism, now I look at it and I think it's very intuitive. Right? Let's be who we want others to be and ourselves to be, to live in the world that we want to live in. It seems basic to me.
And innate. I think this goes back to something that's been argued, debated, refined throughout human history. So long as we've been able to communicate, we've been having these conversations. And this is possibly how religions are originally formed, where they start from having these debates and conversations, and then eventually it gets written down in a book, and that's what then other people rely on later. But it's got to come from somewhere, I guess, unless you believe it's been divinely inspired. But I know that you're also very interested in a respectful way in the history of religion and the origins of deities, and this is the subject of, is it an upcoming book or an upcoming talk which you're putting together?
I just released it actually to YouTube. I'd given it in several cities, and the audience just loved it. I've done some really heavy subjects lately, and I needed a break, but I wanted something that would be interesting so we could laugh as we learn. I did a speech, which you can find online, about white Jesus. And this idea that if an actual first century Jewish guy appeared in the United States, that Jesus appeared now, there's a good chance that immigration would jam him into the back of a van and disappear him into a concentration camp. Because our perception of Jesus in this country is very Eurocentric. He's white. If I was to take, and we find, and I give examples in the speech, of Jesuses that reflect the cultures that believe. So there's a Native American Jesus, there's a Japanese Jesus, there is a Hindu, there's a Muslim Jesus, etc. If you go into those cultures, their gods look like them. And if I was to take an African-American Jesus, on the cross or giving the Sermon on the Mount, I was to walk into the standard American Protestant Baptist church and hold up that Jesus, they'd probably beat my ass. They would be offended. How this blasphemy, right? Well, why? What's the problem? You're supposed to be a personal Jesus. And so with a lot of jokes sort of interspersed into the presentation, I walk through the early Caesars and early Rome and how that Jesus looked a lot like the Caesars. And we get into the artists who would paint Jesus to kind of look like themselves, almost like a self-portrait, and bring us into the present day and lovingly tie it all back into humanism. And I leave everybody with 3 encouragements. If I was God, if I'd made a God in my own image, what would I encourage humanity to be and to do? And I leave with an encouragement. But you can just Google or YouTube Seth Andrews, White Jesus, and the speech will pop right up. I think it runs about 35 minutes.
I don't want to give away the 3 commandments. People should go and watch the speech. But I am curious, as I said, as someone who's been a leading light in this movement, in the online content space, and helping to spread humanism and normalize atheism and make it okay for people for coming up to over 15, nearly 20 years now. What is your message to others who are finding their way in this space, who maybe, as you say, it's been difficult times, things can feel a little bit hopeless sometimes. So what are your words of encouragement for listeners?
Well, I think primarily I would say give yourself some grace. This journey is often chess, not checkers. This is something that takes a while. And don't rush. Some people think, well, I should call myself an atheist, but I don't know if I'm an atheist. Am I an agnostic, or am I an agnostic atheist, or am I a secular, or am I a doubter, or am I a seeker? And they get hung up on terms. Hey, I just say, stop. You don't need a label, right? Your journey is not about a label that you have to face it forward. You have to put it on a name tag for anybody else. It's just your journey, right? So take it at your speed. Give yourself some grace for the times you have gotten it wrong and will get it wrong. Be a sponge, ask a lot of questions, and understand that we are all humans trying to figure it out. No worthy God would ever punish anyone who was genuinely trying to figure it out and live truthfully. That's a great place to be when you understand that if there was a God, a truly benevolent God, worthy God, good God, worth following, would never punish a child for saying, I just want to be right on this. I just want to live authentically on this. I just want it to be true, and I want to be able to prove it to be true. That's a noble thing. And certainly no benevolent God would ever punish or send to hell or annihilate or cause earthly calamity to someone who was trying to live truthfully. Even if you're still going through doubts about God, understand that you have every permission, and that's the second part. The church likes to say that we don't have permission to think for ourselves. Trust not in your own understanding. If you look at the whole of Christianity, even though it's framed as a love religion, it's really a dehumanizing scenario. Baptism is a great example. So if you go and you're baptized by immersion, this is symbolism. You are dying to yourself. Yourself has to die because you're so awful, you're unworthy. There is no one worthy, no, not one. And you have to be risen again, raised again, a new creation in Jesus Christ. The Bible, the faith itself, in its fundamental literal form, says you can't figure this out. Let God do the thinking for you. And I always say, give yourself permission to do your own thinking, because your understanding is important. And because you are qualified to be able to walk in and say, all right, fine, show me, prove it, or I'm not going to buy it. You have the authority to be able to do that. You have the autonomy to be able to do that. Liberate yourself. You don't owe anyone else any explanation for who you are, where you're going, or why. You're not on this earth to keep them comfortable, and they don't get to invalidate your autonomy and authentic self and your worth as a human being on this planet. So once you give yourself permission to tell all the piety crowd and the fundy Bible-banging people who tell you that your mind is infected and you must do this and you have to do that or else you're in sin, the minute you're able to say, no, you don't get to do that. No, I do get to ask these questions and expect good answers. And I am going to find my own voice, and I am going to live my values, and I am going to take this journey on my own terms. The second you give yourself permission to do that, every day after that, despite the challenges, every day after that, you had given yourself a gift. The authentic life is one of the biggest gifts you can possibly give to yourself, and it will return to you every single day. It'll fill up your heart. You'll be comfortable in your own skin, and others may make it difficult because now you're not validating them, but your journey was never about them. Your journey is about you, and it is just fine that it's about you. Anyway, that's the encouragement that I usually give people who are deconstructing.
Whilst that's a wonderful way to end, I'd love to end on that note. I do have to ask you our standard closing question. So we've spoken at length about things that you've changed your mind on and how you've kept an open mind. But is there anything specific that you can share with us that you've changed your mind on recently, Seth?
I've mentioned the hot button word earlier, and this is going to be polarizing. But one of the big bad mustache twirling villains in the American story is socialism. And I, in my own life, didn't understand. And I'm not an outright socialist, but I have embraced the term, for me, a democratic socialist. I think understanding the responsibilities that societies have to society, to the individuals. I live in a country where we talk about freedom, and it's all about individuals. It's many times a very myopic, self-centered, selfish version of freedom. We saw this when people were being mandated to take the vaccine to keep other people safe, to help society. we see all of these things that are brought down, and everybody wants to talk about freedom, but nobody wants to talk about responsibility. And no one wants to talk about societies that have a responsibility to take care of each other. And so I have really, in the last half decade, embraced, I used to be a laissez-faire, Jesus is a capitalist free market guy way back in the day. But I have changed my mind to believe that, I have a societal responsibility. And socialist type programs, for lack of a better way of saying them, we already use them in terms of our public schools, our fire and safety, emergency services. There are state programs that benefit the poor. And I think we have to stop thinking in terms of rugged individualism, which is a catchword in right-wing circles, and think, well, the individual is important and autonomy is important, but if I'm going to be part of a society, I have a responsibility to that society. What is it? And how do we create governmental programs to assist those who are disadvantaged, who don't have the head start that I have, who are going through immense suffering, right? If I want to decrease the suffering and increase the joy, well, I can't do it alone. I think we can provide a governmental structure, hopefully with a measure of accountability someday, acting in a pro-social and honest way, to assist and to build the country that I want to live in. Right now, it's a free-for-all. It's a meritocracy. It's an oligarchy. It's a grift. The billionaires have become wealth hoarders. We got a trillionaire or close to a trillionaire, which is just obscene. And I think, there's no reason in a world of this much suffering that there should be billionaires. I think societal, socialist, democratically socialist programs, we can have democratic processes in place, but we also need programs that we are all funding to benefit the society that benefits us. Freedom with responsibility. And that's something I've really changed my mind on in the last few years, to embrace the concept of democratic socialism.
Seth, thank you so much for the time. There's so much more I'd like to ask, and I'm sure we'll get lots of questions from our listeners as well. But this has been an absolute pleasure. So thank you.
It's lovely to be able to talk. Humanism is just what I've been leading with. I just want the world to know that we're good. I'm good. You're good. People are good. And this thing that we walk through life with, that we're all born with original sin, and we're all infected, and we're all unworthy, and we all deserve hell or annihilation or the grave or some sort of punishment because we're icky and all this. Whenever we stop all of that nonsense and we see and acknowledge and promote the preciousness of being alive, it is just transformative. So any conversation about humanism, I'm in. You call me, I'm in. And so it's an honor to be able to talk about this subject that's so dear to my heart. What do we don't have gods and monsters, right? All we really have is each other. And that means we know what the work is, and we know what needs to change, and we know who's going to have to change it. And the humanist within us should now be activated to go and change the world.
Seth Andrews, thank you so much for joining us on Humanism Now.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Humanism Now. If you enjoy the podcast, please leave us a rating and review. And why not share this episode with a friend? It really helps more people hear about the show. And we're building a growing community over on Ko-Fi. Special thanks to our supporters. If you would like to join them, links are in the show notes. You can follow us on all social media at Humanism Now Pod. And thanks once again for listening to Humanism Now.